In the world, people often draw parallels between dangerous individuals and deadly creatures of nature. Such an association arises when discussing the main character of this story, a woman whose nature resembles that of a black widow, a treacherous and poisonous spider. The story begins in the small town of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where Raynella Dossett Leath was born on October 25, 1948. This settlement had a special status. It was created specifically for workers of the local atomic power plant, where the future protagonist's parents worked. Due to its closed and isolated nature, the town was distinguished by its high level of security. Parents could fearlessly let their children play in the streets, which was rare for America at that time. From childhood, Raynella demonstrated exceptional intellectual abilities and excelled in her studies. Her efforts were rewarded. She independently enrolled at East Tennessee State University in Knoxville, where she earned her nursing degree. It was here that fate brought her together with Edward Dossett, an ambitious law student who dreamed of a successful career in business and politics. Edward, a quiet and friendly young man from rural Tennessee, immediately fell in love with the beautiful dark-haired Raynella. They were united not only by their common background but also by their aspirations for professional success. 1970 was marked by the wedding of the young couple, after which they settled in the suburbs of Knoxville, Solway. Here stood Ed's family's old farmhouse, which the couple restored with the help of contractors. The estate transformed into an ideal place for the young family, where they started their own livestock farm. Both of their professional lives flourished. Raynella, working at the local hospital, gradually rose to the position of head nurse. Edward, after completing law school in 1972, began a promising career as a lawyer. His ambitions peaked in 1982 when he ran for the position of Knox County District Attorney General, which had become vacant after his predecessor's retirement. Thanks to an extensive election campaign and significant support from his wife, Ed achieved his desired success. The couple's family life also blossomed. In 1978, their first child, daughter Maggie, was born, followed by son Eddie in 1983, and their youngest daughter Cade in 1985. After the birth of their firstborn, Raynella left her job, dedicating herself to household management and helping on the farm, as her husband's income fully supported the family. However, secrets lurked behind the facade of their successful life. As District Attorney General, Ed began a romantic relationship with his secretary Kay, who was also married. Despite their families being friends who spent holidays and weekends together, Ed and Kay maintained a hidden affair. Even when Kay became pregnant and left her job, their meetings didn't cease. In their conservative county, such a relationship could seriously damage the reputation of a high-ranking official, so both decided to keep everything secret, not destroying their marriages. According to people who knew Raynella closely, she was a woman with a domineering character who sought to control everything. Her toxic behavior and attitude toward others forced people to keep their distance. People avoided Raynella, few sought even ordinary communication with her, let alone friendly relationships. Close friends of the couple and Ed's relatives witnessed how problems in their marriage began to manifest almost immediately after the wedding. The root cause was Raynella's uncontrollable desire to control every aspect of their life. That's why many people in their circle understood Ed's motives for marital infidelity. Later, a new problem emerged in Edward's life: unbearable stomach pain. The situation became so severe that during one of the government meetings, his assistant noticed how the district attorney was barely containing his pain, constantly holding his stomach and looking ill. When asked about his well-being, Ed expressed a horrifying suspicion. He believed his toxic wife was trying to poison him by mixing something into his food. However, he refused the offered help, assuring that he would handle it himself. By September 1991, Edward's condition had critically deteriorated, leading to his hospitalization. Despite previous suspicions about his wife, they weren't confirmed. Medical examination revealed a malignant tumor in his small intestine and liver. The disease was already in its late stage, with metastases spreading to neighboring abdominal organs. After returning home, Edward shared the terrible diagnosis with Raynella. As he later told his close ones, his wife took the news surprisingly calmly but insisted on keeping the diagnosis secret. This decision seemed strange, considering her husband's critical condition. Later, Raynella explained her decision by wanting to allow her husband to work as long as possible, believing that activity and movement would prolong his life. According to her, she cherished hope for his miraculous recovery. However, people familiar with the family saw a selfish motive in this, forcing a terminally ill husband to work to maintain their high income. By March 1992, Edward's health had significantly deteriorated, and it became obvious that he was losing his battle with the disease. During this difficult period, he wanted to be close to his family and reached out to his loved ones, particularly his cousin Elizabeth, with whom he maintained a warm relationship until the end. The woman traveled over 700 kilometers from another state to see her cousin, possibly for the last time. However, Raynella categorically refused to let her into the house, not even opening the door. The bewildered Elizabeth had to return home empty-handed. That same evening, Raynella sent a letter justifying her actions by Edward's poor condition, claiming he couldn't receive visitors and shock them with his appearance. However, these explanations raised doubts, as just a few days ago, Edward himself had asked relatives to visit him, unconcerned about his appearance. Despite her apparent concern about her husband's appearance, the next day Raynella insisted on his return to work. Despite unbearable pain and difficulty moving, Edward submitted to his wife's will and continued performing his duties as prosecutor until the end. The question of what prevented him from meeting his cousin in the same condition remained unanswered. Raynella's behavior appeared suspicious and brutal, suggesting she was hiding something important. However, there was undeniable evidence of Edward's deteriorating health. His last working day proved to be a real ordeal. After it, he was forced to permanently leave his position. Bedridden, Ed needed constant injections to alleviate unbearable pain. Doctors gave grim prognosis, giving him only a few weeks to live. It seemed that the former district attorney was living his last days, being on the verge of life and death under constant medical supervision. However, July 9, 1992, brought an unexpected turn of events. Early in the morning, the director of the local city market contacted 911, reporting problems with his acquaintance who couldn't call for help herself. He directed emergency services to the Dossett's house. At the scene, law enforcement encountered Raynella's strange behavior. She somehow concealed information about her husband's terminal illness. Police found her in a hysterical state. The woman was frantically moving around Ed's body lying on the ground. According to Raynella's version, the tragedy occurred when Ed went out to check on the cattle. Hearing unusual noise and disturbance among the cows, she tried to call her husband but received no response. Going outside, she found Edward unconscious. According to her, the frightened herd of cows had apparently trampled him. To drive away the animals, she fired several shots from a revolver. Medics pronounced the 43-year-old Ed dead. Initially, police leaned toward the accident version. However, during Raynella's questioning at the station, many questions arose that cast doubt on her story. Upon learning about the deceased's terminal illness, detectives began noticing inconsistencies. It was surprising that Ed, who could barely move and was terminally ill, suddenly wanted to check on the cattle. Raynella's behavior was also unclear. Knowing about her husband's critical condition, she allowed him to go to the herd alone and didn't raise an alarm when he didn't return for a long time. According to her account, she stayed in the house until she heard loud noise. Finding her husband covered in abrasions and hoof marks, she, thanks to her hospital work experience, provided first aid and performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation, but unsuccessfully. Raynella's subsequent story contained even more contradictions. She claimed she couldn't get through to emergency services, and simply forgot the hospital's number. Detectives found this strange, as being a former head nurse at the local medical center, she should have remembered these numbers. However, her convincing manner of storytelling and explanation that she hadn't worked at the hospital for a long time made investigators accept this version, despite all the inconsistencies. Raynella justified her actions by panic and shock. Eventually, she contacted her acquaintance, the director of the local market, who called emergency services. Due to significant damage to the body, it was impossible to determine the immediate cause of death at the scene. An autopsy was needed. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the area but found no substantial physical evidence. Eventually, Edward's death was classified as an accident, and the case was closed. However, this was just the beginning, as many doubted the truthfulness of Raynella's words. People familiar with Edward's health condition knew that in his last days, he could barely stay conscious for more than a few minutes due to unbearable pain and constant injections. His sudden decision to check on the cattle seemed implausible. He couldn't even stand on his own due to the effects of strong medications. His legs would buckle beneath him. The medical examiner confirmed the presence of numerous internal injuries and bone fractures, as well as hoof marks on the body, which seemingly confirmed Raynella's version. The deceased's relatives knew about a special condition in Edward's insurance policy. In case of accidental death, the payout would double. Natural death from cancer also provided a payout, but significantly smaller. This explained the motivation to present the death as an accident. Declaring the death accidental allowed Raynella to receive a double insurance payout. This also explained her initial reluctance to inform the police about her husband's illness. However, her reputation as a controlling, toxic person raised additional suspicions. Edward's relatives, conducting their own investigation, discovered new strange circumstances. According to Raynella, she allegedly shot at one of the cows in a fit of rage, but examination of the herd revealed no injured animals. The question arose, why make up such absurd details? Another disturbing fact was the almost complete absence of in the deceased's blood. Considering the regular intake of high doses necessary for pain relief in late-stage cancer, this was impossible. The medical examiner confirmed that the concentration was close to zero, indicating no painkillers had been taken for at least 24 hours. A logical question arose: how could Edward move independently without painkillers in such a condition? Despite this, the official investigation was closed. A theory was proposed that Edward might have orchestrated such an exit from life, knowing about his inevitable death, to ensure a larger insurance payout for his family. However, it remained unclear why he hadn't taken painkillers before executing such a plan. All these contradictory circumstances didn't add up to a complete picture. The suspicions of the deceased's close ones gained new confirmation during the funeral. At Edward's funeral, those present couldn't help but notice his wife Raynella's unusual behavior. Instead of appearing grief-stricken, the woman radiated surprising cheerfulness. She casually moved from one group of guests to another, engaging in pleasant conversations as if she were at an ordinary social reception. Such behavior particularly struck those who knew her as a person with quite a sharp character in everyday life. Her husband's death brought Raynella some relief. She no longer needed to constantly care for the sick. Having sufficient financial security and freed from the need to work, she decided to dedicate her time to communicating with her children. However, the measured life quickly bored the energetic woman. She began regularly visiting the local pool with her children. The facility's owner was David Lead, a well-known figure in town. At that time, he had a solid family, a beloved wife, a daughter, and a newborn grandson whom he adored. Raynella and David's life paths were very different. She had received thorough education and upbringing, while he hadn't even finished school. Starting work as a hairdresser at 19, David later opened his own beauty salon, which brought him popularity in town. The man paid significant attention to his appearance, even undergoing plastic surgeries to maintain his youth. However, a car accident changed his life. A fragment seriously damaged his eye, partially depriving him of sight and disfiguring his face. Since then, he never parted with his sunglasses. Regular meetings at the pool gradually brought Raynella and David closer. A romance sparked between them, which didn't remain a secret from David's wife. She filed for divorce, but by that time, it no longer concerned her husband. He was madly in love with Raynella. After a quick divorce, in January 1993, they married, and David moved to Raynella's farm. The wedding, which took place just 6 months after Edward's death, caused quite a stir in the local community. For such a tight-knit community, marriage to a friend of the deceased husband, especially given the suspicious circumstances of his death, became a real scandal. However, Raynella was used to shocking those around her. Initially, the couple simply ignored all the gossip, and eventually, the rumors naturally subsided. Soon, Raynella's difficult character emerged. Once, Cindy, David's daughter, found her father crying in his pickup truck. To her question, he only briefly mentioned an argument with his wife, refusing further explanation. The daughter was stunned. She had never seen her father in such a state before. 1994 brought terrible grief to Raynella's life. Her younger son Eddie, who was 11 years old, died in a car accident. On that fatal day, he was riding in a car with his 15-year-old sister Maggie. The girl had a learner's permit that only allowed her to drive under the supervision of an adult with a full license. However, she decided to drive on her own. Unable to maintain control, Maggie collided with an oncoming vehicle. Eddie, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, was ejected through the windshield. The boy died from his injuries before paramedics arrived. This tragedy led to Raynella being called to the police to provide testimony. Although several witnesses claimed there were no adults in the car when Maggie was driving, Raynella insisted on her version of events. According to her, she was with the children in Solon when this tragic accident occurred, just couldn't prevent the catastrophe. The police accepted the woman's explanation without pressing any charges. If the case had been investigated more thoroughly, like the mysterious death of her first husband, perhaps subsequent events could have been prevented. But Raynella's persuasiveness again helped her avoid legal troubles. Soon, a new drama unfolded. A divorce began between Edward's former secretary, Kay, and her husband Stephen. He unexpectedly discovered that his second child with Kay was actually Edward's. When this information reached Raynella, she invited Steve over for a conversation. After acknowledging that she knew about the affair, the next day she proposed meeting again, supposedly to hand over important documents. Raynella invited Steve to her farm, led him to the barn, promising to show documents that proved all of Kay's children were fathered by Edward. Suddenly, she pulled out a loaded revolver and opened fire. Fortunately, Steve managed to dodge the bullets and escape unharmed. While he was about to call the police, Raynella beat him to it. In panic, she reported to law enforcement that Steve had come to her with a weapon and threatened violence. Later it was revealed that her true motive was an attempt to gain custody of the child born from her late husband's affair with his secretary. Detectives quickly uncovered the deception, and Raynella was charged with attempted murder. After preliminary hearings, she was released on a $200,000 bail. Despite her attorney's active attempts to get the charges completely dropped, the situation wasn't working in Raynella's favor. Eventually, she agreed to a plea deal, receiving a relatively light sentence, 6 years of probation and 100 days of community service. Meanwhile, Raynella continued manipulating her new husband David. She changed his will so that she became the primary heir to all his property. Even his beloved daughter Cindy was left with only 10% of the inheritance, while Raynella was to receive the house and all other assets. In January 2000, David's health sharply deteriorated. He suffered from hallucinations, had very high cholesterol levels, and suffered a stroke. Raynella immediately took control of the situation, forbidding close ones, including daughter Cindy and grandson, from seeing David. Although he managed to leave the hospital, his health condition forced him to leave his business. He showed signs of dementia and memory problems. During one of his visits to the neurologist, David vaguely remembered how Raynella once tried to smother him with a pillow, but the doctor ignored these words, considering them another hallucination. On March 13, 2003, David's mother was hospitalized due to cancer. Unexpectedly, Raynella visited her, and then called Cindy, David's daughter, from there. She asked her to check on her father, explaining that she had left him food on the bedside table and was worried he might not finish eating. Raynella's sudden concern and her call raised suspicions. How could she know whether David had touched the food? Her worry seemed especially strange considering that in recent months she had done everything possible to limit father-daughter communication. Moreover, her unexpected visit to her mother-in-law in the hospital surprised everyone. She had never visited David's mother before. Cindy couldn't immediately fulfill Raynella's request. When she arrived at the house, no one answered the calls or opened the door. Then the worried Raynella hurried home herself, where she found David in bed with a gunshot wound to the head. Calling 911, she immediately began telling law enforcement about her husband's suicide, explaining his decision by long-term depression. However, this version raised doubts among David's close ones. Despite health problems, he had a strong emotional connection with his daughter and grandson, looked well, and bravely fought his illness. Moreover, relatives knew about his panic fear of that originated in childhood. While hunting with his father, David categorically refused to shoot living creatures. No one could believe he would take a gun in his hands himself. Raynella told investigators her version of events that day. She left food for her husband and then went to visit his mother in the hospital. According to her, before she left, David behaved strangely, talked distantly, hugged her tightly and kissed her goodbye. Now she claimed to understand. It was his final farewell. She insisted on the suicide version, although she claimed to have never seen the found weapon before. Given Raynella's dubious past, few believed her words. There were many unclear details in the case. First, 3 shots were fired from the pistol, the first and third missed, while the second was fatal. 1 shot was made from another weapon, which wasn't found at the scene. Second, the fatal wound was on the left side, although David was right-handed and could barely see with his left eye after the old accident. He simply couldn't aim at this part of his head. David's family was convinced of Raynella's involvement in the murder. It seemed the Black Widow would finally be held accountable, but she acted quickly and thoughtfully, ordering her second husband's body to be cremated. This destroyed many potential pieces of evidence and made a full autopsy impossible. For Cindy, the death of her beloved father was a terrible blow, compounded by the discovery that he had left her practically nothing in inheritance. For 3 years, she tried to draw law enforcement's attention to this case, but Raynella, using money and influence, consistently emerged unscathed. Finally, in 2006, having lost hope in government structures, Cindy hired private detectives. She wanted only one thing: to achieve justice and deprive Raynella of her father's undeserved inheritance, being convinced that his death was staged. The work of private detectives brought results. They found convincing evidence that confirmed Cindy's suspicions. Based on new data, the official investigation into David's death was reopened. This time, police didn't limit themselves to a superficial examination of Raynella's testimony but thoroughly analyzed the cases of both her husband's deaths. It was discovered that a serious error had been made in Ed's toxicology report. In reality, a lethal concentration of was found in his system. With such a level of painkillers in his blood, he physically couldn't have walked to the cattle. By 2006, Raynella was charged with Edward's murder. His death wasn't an accidental trampling by animals, but a carefully planned poisoning. Simultaneously, information surfaced that Raynella had secretly arranged with the funeral home and prepaid for her second husband's cremation. This gave grounds to suspect her of concealing evidence, and she was charged with David's intentional murder. However, she continued to play the victim role, skillfully manipulating those around her. In September 2007, court hearings began. The Black Widow didn't admit guilt in the murders. She was released on a modest $5,000 bail, with official hearings scheduled for March 2009. The jury couldn't reach a consensus. Of 12 people, only 1 considered her innocent, while the rest were convinced she systematically killed husbands for property and money. Due to the lack of unanimous decision, the trial was declared a mistrial. In 2010, a new trial took place. Ballistics experts provided important evidence. The fatal bullet was fired from at least 30 centimeters away, too great a distance for suicide, as David physically couldn't have held the weapon that far. Moreover, fingerprints on the weapon were wiped clean, clearly indicating staging. The investigation established that after the murder, Raynella went to the hospital to David's mother, creating an alibi. She tried to manipulate the situation so Cindy would find her father's body and call the police, but the plan failed. The prosecutor proved that David was given a combination of drugs similar to those used after surgeries, a procedure that Raynella, as a nurse, could easily perform. On January 25, 2010, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury found Raynella guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years. Strangely, charges regarding her first husband's death were dropped. In early 2011, the verdict in David's murder case was overturned due to the discovery of the judge's addiction. However, there was also good news. David's will was invalidated due to his illness affecting cognitive functions, and half of his property was returned to his daughter. Raynella's lawyers' attempts to appeal the case in 2013 were unsuccessful, but they continued fighting and achieved certain results. In January 2017, Raynella faced court again. At trial, the prosecutor presented their version of events. Raynella's plan failed when she, being an inexperienced shooter, missed with the first shot. This changed the entire dynamics of the crime, forcing her to shoot twice more. Based on blood spatter patterns and bullet locations, experts could not only determine the trajectory of shots but also establish their sequence. The second shot was most likely fatal. The defense presented another theory. The attorney claimed that in rare cases, a person can fire multiple shots at themselves due to postmortem spasms, when the finger involuntarily pulls the trigger. This, in his opinion, is what happened to David. Cindy, the deceased's daughter, testified about Raynella's unnatural behavior that day, which the prosecution interpreted as an attempt to establish an alibi. An important witness was Stephen, the former husband of Ed's mistress, whom Raynella had previously shot at and was convicted of attempted murder. He testified that back then she openly stated her intentions to kill him, and he survived only due to her poor shooting and running out of bullets. In his opinion, having avoided serious punishment, Raynella believed in her impunity and took up arms again, this time shooting her second husband, though missing twice due to poor marksmanship. In a desperate attempt to convince the jury of the suicide version, the defense brought David's blood-stained bed into the courtroom. 2 holes in the mattress and headboard indicated the bullet's trajectory. Defense medical examiners and the attorney with a revolver demonstrated to the jury how David could have made all 3 shots. Unexpectedly for everyone, the court acquitted the Black Widow. The judge explained his decision by the lack of convincing evidence of guilt. No blood or gunshot residue was found on Raynella's clothes or body, and she had an alibi. She was in the hospital during her husband's death. There was no evidence of either her involvement in the crime or that she was the last person to see David alive. The defense triumphed, while the prosecution and jury were disappointed with the verdict. The jury leaned toward finding her guilty, but the judge stated he was simply doing his job, consciously making this atypical decision instead of shifting responsibility to the jury. Today, 76-year-old Raynella, who miraculously managed to avoid justice each time, lives on her farm in South Weymouth. No one dares to question her anymore about the deaths of both husbands. Her children stand by her side. Although the complete truth about these tragic deaths will likely never be known, many are convinced of her involvement in both husbands' deaths. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Until next time, friends.